You know that feeling? Like
Yeah.
you're just weighed down, your energy's completely zapped, and stuff you used to love just feels, maybe even connecting with people feels like climbing a mountain. And underneath it all, there's this sense of hopelessness or dissatisfaction. Maybe you're even easily irritated, feeling cut off.
Yeah. And if that sounds familiar to anyone listening, it's important to note these aren't just random blips. They're recognized patterns of human suffering, actually.
Okay, so it's a thing.
It's definitely a thing.
Yeah.
What you're describing really falls under what we call psychological distress. That's basically when the emotional pain inside gets so intense it starts messing with your everyday life.
Oh, so?
What your thoughts, your feelings, how you act, even just your basic ability to enjoy things, your quality of life takes a hit.
Right.
And it's so crucial to get this. It's absolutely not a personal flaw. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a really complex human response.
Okay. So the big question we're tackling today, the one that feels almost impossible sometimes, is how can humans self-repair?
It sounds a bit like, I don't know, science fiction, doesn't it? Like we should just be able to, fix ourselves.
Right. Like pull yourself up by your bootstrap.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But what if it's not so out there? What if this whole self-repair idea is actually an active path you can choose to take?
Yes.
Like a journey involving becoming more aware, making deliberate changes, tapping into strengths you maybe didn't even know you had.
Precisely. That's the really hopeful perspective, and it's backed up by a lot of research. It's not magic, not a quick fix, definitely not.
Okay.
But it is an active process. Building awareness, learning ways to cope, making positive shifts in how you live day to day, and using both your own inner resilience and, the support you can find around you.
So that's our mission for this deep dive then, exploring psychological self-repair.
That's the plan, really getting into it.
Okay, let's dive in. So where do we start? Maybe with what might be underneath these feelings, the potential conditions. Good place to start. Then we can maybe unpack some of the factors that feed into this distress. Stress, past stuff, societal pressures, even just getting older.
Right, the why.
Exactly. But then, crucially, we'll shift gears and look at the human capacity for repair. Things like resilience, post-traumatic growth, growing from hardship, and the brain's amazing adaptability, neuroplasticity.
Okay, that sounds more hopeful.
It is. And then we'll get practical. We'll focus on evidence-based strategies, things that research shows can actually make a difference to well-being.
Like therapy or stuff you can do yourself.
Both. Therapy, self-help techniques, lifestyle changes, they all play a role. We'll also touch on finding meaning and purpose, which sounds abstract but is incredibly important. And finally, building up those inner resources like self-esteem and maybe even more powerfully, self-compassion.
Okay. It sounds like a really thorough look. Let's get into it. So those underlying conditions, you mentioned the feelings, low energy, losing interest, hopelessness, irritability. Now, obviously, like you said, we're not diagnosing anyone here. You need a professional for that.
Absolutely. Essential disclaimer. Yes.
But these kinds of symptoms, they often line up with recognized conditions, right?
They do. And quite often, they point towards depressive disorders.
Okay. Like clinical depression, major depressive disorder.
Exactly, MDD. The absolute key thing there is the persistence. You need either a depressed mood or a significant loss of interest or pleasure in things that's anhedonia almost every day for at least 2 weeks.
2 weeks minimum.
Right. And it has to be a real change from how you usually function. It's not just a bad mood for a couple of days.
What else comes with it?
Well, you need 5 or more symptoms total, so besides those 2 core ones. It could be significant changes in appetite or weight, sleeping too much or too little, feeling really fatigued or having no energy, feelings of worthlessness or excessive guilt, difficulty thinking or concentrating, making decisions, and sometimes recurrent thoughts of death or suicide.
Wow. That really affects everything.
It really does. Thoughts, feelings, behavior. Everyday tasks can feel monumental. But the crucial thing is, it is treatable. And it's common, maybe 1 in 6 people experience an episode at some point.
Okay. And then there's another one you mentioned, persistent depressive disorder, dysthymia.
Yes, PDD or dysthymia. Think of this one as more chronic, a lower grade but long-lasting depression.
So less intense, maybe, but it just hangs around.
Pretty much. It's defined as a depressed mood, or in kids and teens, it can be irritability that lasts for most of the day, on more days than not, for at least 2 full years in adults.
2 years? Wow.
Yeah, or 1 year for children and adolescents. So while the symptoms might not be as severe as in a major depressive episode, the sheer duration is incredibly challenging.
What does that look like, symptom-wise?
Often things like poor appetite or overeating, insomnia or hypersomnia, low energy or fatigue, low self-esteem, poor concentration or difficulty making decisions, and feelings of hopelessness. Sometimes people with PDD are seen as just having a gloomy personality, and it often starts quite early in life, maybe childhood or adolescence.
Okay. We also hear about SESE, seasonal affective disorder. That's definitely linked to the seasons, isn't it?
It is. Most commonly, it's winter-onset SAD. Symptoms usually start in the fall, get worse in the winter, and then ease up in the spring.
And those symptoms are?
Typically things like oversleeping, craving carbohydrates, gaining weight, having low energy, and wanting to withdraw socially. Like hibernating almost. Less common, but it happens, is summer-onset SAD. That tends to look different, maybe insomnia, poor appetite, weight loss, feeling agitated or anxious, more irritable.
Interesting. Any idea why that happens?
The thinking involves disruptions to our internal body clock, the circadian rhythm, due to the changing light patterns. Also changes in brain chemicals like serotonin and melatonin, which are influenced by sunlight exposure.
Makes sense. And you briefly mentioned a couple of others, just to round out the depression picture.
Just briefly, yeah. There's disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, DMDD, which is diagnosed in children and involves persistent irritability and really severe frequent temper outbursts.
Okay.
And also premenstrual dysphoric disorder, PMDD. This involves significant mood swings, irritability, depression, or anxiety symptoms that occur in the week or two before menstruation and improve shortly after it starts.
Got it. So a whole spectrum under the depression umbrella, but what about anxiety? Because that feeling of worry, that unease, that can be just as crippling, right?
Oh, absolutely. Anxiety disorders are characterized by excessive fear. That's the emotional response to a real or perceived imminent threat or anxiety, which is more about anticipating a future threat.
And the key is excessive.
Exactly. The fear or anxiety is out of proportion to the actual situation. It's persistent, and it significantly interferes with daily functioning. And they are incredibly common. Estimates suggest about a third of U.S. adults and adolescents experience an anxiety disorder at some point.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is. And they often come with physical symptoms, too. Muscle tension, restlessness, fatigue, sleep problems, rapid heartbeat, sweating, shortness of breath, stomach issues. The body is definitely involved.
Can you break down some of the main types?
Sure. Let's start with generalized anxiety disorder, GAD. This is basically persistent and excessive worry about a number of different things: work, health, family, finances, that the person finds really difficult to control.
Just worrying all the time about everything.
Pretty much, and it interferes with daily life. It usually comes with physical symptoms too, like feeling restless or on edge, being easily fatigued, having trouble concentrating, irritability, muscle tension, sleep disturbances.
Okay, then there's panic disorder. That sounds intense.
It is. Panic disorder involves recurrent unexpected panic attacks. A panic attack is a sudden rush of intense fear or discomfort that peaks within minutes.
What happens during an attack?
A whole range of things. Heart palpitations or pounding heart, sweating, trembling or shaking, sensations of shortness of breath or smothering, feeling like you're choking, chest pain, nausea, feeling dizzy or lightheaded, chills or heat sensations, numbness or tingling, feeling detached from reality or yourself, fear of losing control or fear of dying.
That sounds absolutely terrifying.
It really is. And a significant part of panic disorder is the persistent worry about having more attacks or their consequences, that fear of the fear.
Right. And social anxiety, being afraid in social situations.
Yes, social anxiety disorder or social phobia. This is marked. Significant anxiety or discomfort about social situations where the person might be exposed to possible scrutiny by others. The core fear is usually about being judged negatively, embarrassed, or rejected.
Like public speaking.
That's a classic one.
Yeah.
But also meeting new people, being observed eating or drinking, interacting with authority figures, going to parties. It can be quite broad or more specific.
Okay. And are there other related conditions?
Yes. Briefly, things like specific phobias, intense fear of a specific object or situation, like spiders or heights. Agoraphobia, fear of situations where escape might be difficult. Separation anxiety disorder, and selective mutism. And importantly, it's very common for anxiety and depressive disorders to occur together. They often coexist.
Right. Comorbidity. Okay. Now, you also mentioned burnout earlier. That's a word we hear a lot, especially regarding work.
We do. And while burnout isn't currently a formal medical diagnosis in the same way as depression, it's recognized by the World Health Organization as an occupational phenomenon. It's a state of physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion caused by prolonged or excessive stress, particularly from one's job.
So it's specifically work-related stress.
Primarily, yes. It's defined by three main dimensions: feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion, increased mental distance from one's job, or feelings of negativity or cynicism related to it, and reduced professional efficacy or sense of accomplishment.
Feeling drained, checked out, and like you're not doing a good job.
Exactly. People might feel useless, powerless, like they have nothing left to give. Emotional exhaustion is often seen as the core component, and while burnout can increase the risk for depression, they are considered distinct concepts.
What are the signs someone might be experiencing burnout?
Yeah, chronic fatigue is a big one.
Yeah.
Difficulty concentrating, lack of satisfaction from achievements, feeling let down or disillusioned by your job, doubting your competence, increased irritability or impatience, feeling detached. Also changes in sleep habits, maybe increased reliance on substances like alcohol or food to cope, and sometimes unexplained physical symptoms like headaches or stomach problems.
And what drives it? It sounds like it's more than just having a tough week at work.
Oh, definitely. It usually stems from chronic workplace stressors, things like feeling a lack of control over your work, unclear job expectations, workplace conflicts, or lack of support from colleagues or superiors. Also, work that is overwhelmingly demanding, or conversely, monotonous and unchallenging. Poor work-life balance, excessively long hours, and working in high-pressure or helping professions are also major contributors. The listener's point about being overworked really hits his nail on the head.
Okay, this next one feels deep. Existential concerns or an existential crisis. What's that about?
It really is deep. An existential crisis involves a period of intense questioning about the fundamental aspects of human existence, things like meaning, purpose, freedom, responsibility, life, death. It's grappling with what philosopher Irvin Yalom called the ultimate concerns.
So the big questions.
The biggest questions. The crisis happens when these questions become so overwhelming that they cause significant internal conflict, stress, or anxiety. You might feel like your life lacks meaning or purpose, feel lost or profoundly alone in the universe, or become painfully aware of your own mortality.
What might that feel like, symptom-wise?
It can manifest in various ways. Persistent questioning about the meaning of life or your own existence, feeling that life is inherently meaningless or that you're on the wrong path, unexplainable sadness, guilt, or anxiety, feeling stuck, lost, or adrift, a lack of clear purpose or direction, profound feelings of loneliness or isolation, even when around others, maybe nihilistic thoughts or a strong compulsion to just abandon your current life and start over completely.
Interesting.
It's also noted that sometimes highly intelligent or gifted individuals who may question societal norms more readily can be particularly prone to these kinds of crises.
And what sort of things can trigger this kind of deep questioning?
Often major life events. The death of a loved one, reaching a significant age milestone, experiencing a serious illness, or facing mortality directly. Also, dissatisfaction with career achievements despite external success, the breakdown of a significant relationship, or even just a growing disillusionment with societal values or norms. The listener's comments about aging, being sick of things, and feeling dissatisfied really seem to tap into these potential triggers.
That makes sense. You've covered a lot of ground there, different types of depression, anxiety, burnout, existential angst. To help sort through it, you mentioned a comparison.
Yes, I put together a simple table, really just to highlight how some symptoms overlap across these conditions, while others are more distinct. For instance, low mood is key in depression, but anxiety is more about worry and fear. Fatigue can show up in almost all of them. But that profound questioning of meaning is really central to an existential crisis.
Okay.
Again, it's just for illustrating the landscape, absolutely not for self-diagnosis.
Got it. And a really key point you made is that these things often don't just exist on their own, do they? They're tangled up together.
Precisely. That's so important. They frequently coexist and influence each other, often creating these difficult feedback loops.
How so?
Well, think about chronic stress, a major factor in burnout. It's also a significant risk factor for developing both depression and anxiety disorders.
Right.
And if someone is depressed or anxious, it often makes it much harder for them to cope effectively with stress, which can worsen the stress and the original condition. Burnout itself can increase the risk of developing depression.
And the existential stuff.
Those deep existential questions about meaninglessness or mortality can certainly fuel feelings of anxiety or depression. And going way back, experiencing adversity early in life is known to increase vulnerability to a whole range of mental health issues later on.
So it's all interconnected.
Very much so.
Mhm.
Which means that sometimes a single diagnosis doesn't really capture the full picture of what someone is experiencing. A holistic approach, looking at all these potential contributing factors, is often much more helpful. It really validates that feeling the listener described, that sense of pervasive, multifaceted distress. It is complex.
Okay, so we've explored some of the what's happening. Now let's dig into the why, the factors that contribute to this distress. And like you said, it's usually not just one single thing, is it?
That's absolutely right. Psychological distress rarely stems from a single cause. It's usually a complex interplay between our biological predispositions, our individual life experiences, the environment we live in, and broader societal influences.
Let's start with stress. We all experience stress, but you mentioned chronic stress. That's different, right?
Very different.
Yeah.
Our bodies have a natural stress response, the fight or flight mechanism, which is designed for short-term threats. It's actually helpful in the short run.
Right, gets you out of danger.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the problem arises when stressors are ongoing, relentless, and that stress response system stays activated for long periods. That's chronic stress.
And that's harmful.
Yes, it can be quite detrimental to both physical and mental health. Think about the constant flood of stress hormones like cortisol. Over time, this can disrupt almost all your body's processes.
Like,
It increases the risk for numerous health problems. Anxiety, depression, digestive issues, headaches, muscle tension and pain, heart disease, high blood pressure, stroke, sleep problems, weight gain, even issues with memory and concentration. And it can suppress the immune system.
wow. And psychologically.
Psychologically, it often manifests as persistent fatigue, inability to concentrate, irritability, mood swings, severe worrying, racing thoughts, feeling overwhelmed or hopeless, and potentially an increase in unhealthy coping mechanisms like substance use. It really causes wear and tear on the system.
What are some common sources of this kind of ongoing stress?
Oh, many things in modern life. High-pressure jobs, heavy workloads, long hours, feeling a lack of control at work. That's a big one. Financial difficulties, relationship problems, caring for a sick family member, major life changes like divorce or job loss, even the accumulation of smaller daily hassles can contribute. The listener's mention of being overworked fits right in here.
Okay. You also mentioned past experiences playing a big role. Trauma, neglect, unfairness.
Yes, unfortunately, negative life experiences, particularly those occurring early in life or involving significant trauma, neglect, or betrayal, can leave deep and lasting psychological scars.
Like childhood experiences.
Especially childhood maltreatment. Things like physical, sexual, or emotional abuse or neglect. Research consistently shows this is a potent risk factor for a wide range of mental health problems in adulthood.
What kind of problems?
It's linked to an increased lifetime risk of major depressive disorder, often with an earlier onset, a more severe and chronic course, and sometimes poorer response to treatment. Also, higher rates of anxiety disorders, PTSD, substance use disorders, personality disorders, and even chronic physical illnesses. Interestingly, neglect alone, just the absence of care, significantly increases the risk for current depression.
That's powerful. And trauma more generally, not just in childhood.
Right. A traumatic event is typically defined as exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. It could be directly experiencing it, witnessing it, learning it happened to someone close, or repeated exposure to distressing details like first responders,
Examples.
accidents, physical assault, combat exposure, natural disasters, terrorist attacks, childhood abuse. Many possibilities. Exposure to such events can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, in some individuals.
What are the key symptoms of PTSD?
They generally fall into 4 clusters. Intrusion symptoms, like distressing memories, flashbacks, nightmares. Avoidance, avoiding reminders of the trauma. Negative alterations in cognitions and mood, like negative beliefs about oneself or the world, inability to feel positive emotions, feeling detached. And marked alterations in arousal and reactivity, like irritability, hypervigilance, exaggerated startle response, sleep, and concentration problems.
And how long do these last for a PTSD diagnosis?
For a PTSD diagnosis, these symptoms need to persist for more than 1 month and cause significant distress or impairment in functioning.
Are some people more likely to develop PTSD after trauma?
Yes, risk factors include the severity and frequency of the trauma exposure, prior trauma history, childhood adversity, a pre-existing mental health condition, lack of social support after the event, and being part of a marginalized group facing ongoing stressors. The listener's reference to past unfairness, neglect, and being taken advantage of really speaks to these kinds of potentially impactful experiences.
But it's important to say not everyone who goes through something terrible develops PTSD, right? People can be resilient.
Absolutely critical point. Many individuals demonstrate remarkable resilience and recover without long-term impairment. However, certain factors do increase vulnerability, experiencing multiple traumas, pre-existing anxiety, family instability, poverty, experiencing racism or discrimination, and that crucial factor again, lack of social support.
Okay, let's broaden the lens now to societal factors. How does the world around us contribute?
Hugely. We talk about the social determinants of mental health, or SDMH. These are basically the conditions in which people are born, grow, live, work, and age. Domains like economic stability, poverty, employment, education access and quality, healthcare access and quality, neighborhood and built environment, housing, safety, access to healthy food, and the social and community context, social support, discrimination, civic participation.
And how do these affect mental health?
Unequal distribution of resources and opportunities across these domains leads to significant health inequities. People in marginalized groups often face disadvantages like discrimination, unemployment, food insecurity, and inadequate housing, which are both risk factors for poor mental health and potential consequences of it. The listener's sense that the world feels unacceptable to many really echoes the impact of these systemic issues.
And what about less tangible things like societal expectations?
Oh, yes. The pressure to conform to often unrealistic societal standards regarding appearance, achievement, career success, relationships, lifestyle can be immense.
Yeah, see it everywhere.
Exactly. It can fuel chronic stress, anxiety, low self-esteem, feelings of inadequacy, and contribute to burnout. We internalize messages about perfectionism, engage in constant social comparison, especially online. And this can lead to a fear of judgment, people-pleasing behaviors, and losing touch with our own authentic needs and values.
You mentioned Erich Fromm's critique before. How does that fit in here?
Fromm was a psychoanalyst and social philosopher who argued quite powerfully that modern capitalist society, while providing material abundance for some, often fosters alienation, conformity, and anxiety, ultimately undermining psychological well-being.
How so?
He critiqued the heavy emphasis on consumption, competition, and what he called the personality market, where individuals are valued based on their saleability, their perceived attractiveness, charm, or usefulness in the marketplace.
Like we're commodities.
In a sense, yes. He described the marketing character, someone whose sense of self-worth is dependent on external validation and success in this market. This, he argued, leads to inner emptiness, insecurity, profound dependence on others' approval, and a disconnection from genuine feelings and relationships. Entertainment often becomes just an escape from this emptiness.
That sounds bleak, but familiar.
It can resonate, can't it? He contrasted this with what he called a sane society, one that would prioritize fundamental human needs for relatedness, creativity, love, transcendence, and reason. His analysis really speaks to the listener's feelings of dissatisfaction, distance, and disillusionment with the way things are.
On the flip side of societal pressures, good social connections can help.
Immensely. Positive social connections and strong social support act as a powerful buffer against stress. They're protective against depression and anxiety, link to better sleep, and enhance overall resilience. Conversely, social isolation and lack of support are significant risk factors for poor mental health.
Okay. What about aging? The listener mentioned getting older. How does that play into things?
Aging involves its own set of psychological adjustments and potential stressors. It's important to note that significant cognitive decline isn't an inevitable part of aging for everyone. While processing speed might slow down, accumulated knowledge and wisdom often increase. Personality tends to remain relatively stable.
But mental health can be a concern.
Yes. While many older adults enjoy good mental health, a substantial minority experience problems like depression, anxiety disorders, dementia, or substance abuse. Late-life depression might present differently, sometimes with more physical symptoms, and sadly, suicide rates are particularly high among elderly men.
What are some common stressors associated with aging?
Things like dealing with chronic illness or declining physical health, the loss of loved ones and friends, retirement, and the associated changes in roles and identity, financial insecurity, increased loneliness or social isolation, and confronting existential issues related to mortality. The listener's feeling of getting old and sick of things captures some of this potential weariness.
And finally, you mentioned the education system. How might that contribute to distress or disillusionment?
Well, there's a critique that modern education systems, particularly in higher education, but also earlier, often prioritize standardized testing, academic performance, and competition over holistic development and student well-being.
Too much pressure.
That's often the argument. This intense pressure can contribute significantly to stress, anxiety, and other mental health issues among students. There's also a concern that focusing solely on teaching individual resilience skills without addressing the systemic pressures within the educational environment can inadvertently blame students for struggling. This might feed into that sense of disconnect the listener mentioned.
Is anything changing there?
There's certainly growing awareness and concern about student mental health. We see calls for increased resources, like counselors, but also a push for creating more supportive learning environments, fostering positive teacher-student relationships, promoting mental health literacy, and implementing culturally responsive practices. Some approaches, like positive education, aim to explicitly integrate the science of well-being into schooling.
It sounds like all these different factors, stress, past trauma, societal issues, aging, education, they don't just add up, they kind of weave together, right?
Exactly. That's the compounding effects. They often cluster and interact. For example, someone who experienced childhood adversity might face more challenges in education and employment, leading to greater economic instability and chronic stress, which in turn increases vulnerability to mental health problems.
And societal issues layer on top.
Right. Societal pressures, discrimination, lack of opportunity, these add further layers of stress and disadvantage, disproportionately affecting marginalized communities and sometimes creating cycles that are incredibly hard to break.
Yeah.
It highlights that personal effort, while important, may not always be enough on its own. It really validates the feeling that external circumstances play a huge role in our suffering, and that self-repair might also involve finding ways to navigate or even challenge these complex realities.
Okay, so after laying all that out, the potential conditions, the multitude of contributing factors, could feel pretty heavy, maybe even hopeless, which brings us right back to that core question. Is self-repair actually possible? Or is it just, wishful thinking when you're feeling this low?
That is such a valid and important question, especially when someone is deep in that feeling of distress. It can absolutely feel like an illusion. But the really encouraging thing is that psychological science, through decades of research, provides strong evidence that the capacity for self-repair is very real.
It's not an illusion.
It's not. It's grounded in some fundamental human capacities: psychological resilience, the potential for post-traumatic growth, and the remarkable adaptability of our brains, known as neuroplasticity. Understanding these gives us a solid basis for hope.
Okay, let's break those down. Resilience. We hear that word a lot. What does it actually mean in this context?
Resilience isn't about being untouched by difficulty or never feeling pain. It's more of a dynamic process. It's about adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of...
Adapting well. How?
It involves flexibility, psychological and emotional flexibility. Bouncing back from difficult experiences, yes, but it can also involve profound personal growth. It's not some rare, fixed trait that you either have or don't. It involves behaviors, thoughts, and actions that can be learned and developed over time. It's actually considered ordinary, not extraordinary.
So, what helps people cultivate resilience? What are the key factors?
There are quite a few. Cognitively, things like maintaining a positive outlook, the ability to reframe negative events, good problem-solving skills. Emotionally, effective self-regulation, managing strong feelings. Behaviorally, being adaptable, taking decisive action. Socially, having strong support networks. Also, having a positive view of yourself and confidence in your strengths, having a sense of purpose or meaning in life, and being able to identify and use your personal strengths. And importantly, experiencing distress doesn't mean you lack resilience. In fact, navigating challenging experiences is often how resilience is built.
Okay. Then you mentioned post-traumatic growth, PTG. That sounds like something beyond just bouncing back.
Exactly. PTG refers to positive psychological changes experienced as a result of the struggle with highly challenging life circumstances or traumatic events. It's about growth that occurs because of the struggle, often leading people to a higher level of functioning or deeper sense of meaning than before the event.
That doesn't mean the trauma was good, though?
Absolutely not. PTG doesn't negate the suffering or distress caused by the trauma at all. The trauma itself is not positive. The growth comes from the struggle with the aftermath.
What kind of positive changes are we talking about with PTG?
Research typically identifies several domains. Things like improved relationships, people might feel closer to others, have increased compassion, more intimacy, discovering new possibilities for one's life that weren't apparent before. a greater appreciation for life in general, often with a reordering of priorities, an increased sense of personal strength, feeling more capable of handling future challenges. And sometimes, significant spiritual or existential development changes in belief systems, a deeper understanding of life's purpose.
How does that kind of growth even happen after something so devastating?
It seems to arise from the intense cognitive processing that follows a traumatic event. Trauma often shatters our fundamental assumptions about ourselves, others, and the world. The process of struggling to make sense of the event, to find meaning in its aftermath, is thought to be crucial for PTG.
So meaning-making is key.
Very much so. Factors that facilitate PTG include having good social support, maintaining hope and optimism, being able to effectively manage PTSD symptoms if they're present, and engaging in that deliberate meaning-making process. And it's important to note, PTG and ongoing distress can and often do coexist. You can grow while still struggling.
Okay. And the third element you mentioned was neuroplasticity, the brain changing.
Yes, neuroplasticity is the brain's incredible ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life. It allows the neurons in the brain to compensate for injury and disease, and to adjust their activities in response to new situations or changes in their environment.
So the brain isn't fixed?
Not at all. It can change its structure and function based on our experiences, learning, stimuli, and even in response to injury. This involves creating new connections between neurons, strengthening or weakening existing ones, and sometimes even functional reorganization, where one brain area takes over the function of another damaged area.
How is that relevant to healing from distress or trauma?
It's hugely relevant. We know that chronic stress and trauma can physically alter the brain, for example, leading to hyperactivity in the amygdala, the fear center, changes in the prefrontal cortex, involved in regulation and decision-making, and the hippocampus, involved in memory, and imbalances in neurotransmitters.
But neuroplasticity means that's not permanent.
Exactly. Neuroplasticity is the mechanism that also enables healing and recovery. The brain can rewire itself. It can form new, healthier neural pathways, strengthen circuits involved in emotional regulation, compensate for damaged areas, and essentially learn new ways of responding and functioning.
That's amazing. Can we, actively encourage this positive brain change?
Yes, absolutely. Healing isn't just a passive process. We can actively engage in activities that promote beneficial neuroplastic changes. Many effective psychotherapies, like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, or EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, work in part by leveraging neuroplasticity. Practices like mindfulness and meditation have been shown to change brain structure and function in positive ways. Lifestyle factors are also key. Regular physical exercise, a healthy diet, sufficient sleep, strong social connections, these all support brain health and plasticity. Even learning new skills or engaging in mentally stimulating activities can help. Exercise, for instance, boosts factors like BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which supports neuron growth and survival.
So, circling back to the illusion question, based on all this resilience, PTG, neuroplasticity, self-repair is genuinely possible.
Yes, the evidence strongly suggests it's not an illusion. The potential exists within us. Now, it's not always easy. It's often a challenging journey, and the path looks different for everyone, but the capacity is there. This is why actively engaging in strategies known to promote well-being is so valuable.
So self-repair isn't just passively waiting to feel better. It's an active process.
Absolutely. It's multifaceted. Cognitively, it involves things like challenging unhelpful thoughts, reframing perspectives, making meaning. Emotionally, it's about learning to regulate difficult feelings, practicing acceptance and self-compassion. Behaviorally, it means taking action, problem-solving, engaging in activities aligned with your values, seeking support, adopting healthy habits. Socially, building and nurturing connections, and neurologically, engaging in therapies or practices like mindfulness and exercise that literally help reshape the brain for the better. It's about moving from a place of feeling helpless to reclaiming a sense of agency.
Okay, so we have this capacity, and it involves taking action. What are some of the proven pathways, the evidence-based strategies people can use? You mentioned therapy, self-help, lifestyle.
Right. Psychological science offers a range of strategies that can help manage distress and improve overall well-being. Often, a combination of approaches is the most effective.
For someone really struggling, professional help seems like a logical first step. Psychotherapy.
Yes, for moderate to severe distress, or when symptoms are significantly impacting life, psychotherapy is often a crucial component of recovery.
What are the general benefits of talking to a therapist?
Therapy provides a structured, supportive environment to explore difficulties, gain insight into patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving, and understand how past experiences might be influencing the present.
Mm-hmm.
It helps people learn specific coping mechanisms, manage symptoms, develop problem-solving skills, change unhelpful behaviors or relationship patterns, and ultimately regain a sense of control and satisfaction in life. But it requires active participation. It's a collaborative process.
You mentioned specific types before, like CBT.
Yes, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, is one of the most widely researched and effective therapies, particularly for depression and anxiety disorders. It's typically structured, time-limited, and focuses on identifying and changing unhelpful thinking patterns and behaviors that contribute to distress.
What kind of techniques does CBT use?
Key techniques include cognitive restructuring learning to identify, challenge, and replace negative automatic thoughts, often using tools like thought records. Behavioral activation, scheduling enjoyable or meaningful activities to counteract withdrawal and improve mood. Exposure therapy, gradually confronting feared situations or stimuli in a safe way, often used for anxiety disorders. And skills training, learning things like relaxation techniques, problem solving, assertiveness, stress management. Homework between sessions is common.
Okay. And you mentioned ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy.
Yes. ACT is another powerful approach. It focuses less on changing the content of difficult thoughts and feelings and more on changing your relationship to them. The goal is psychological flexibility, the ability to contact the present moment fully and, based on what the situation affords, persist in or change behavior in the service of chosen values.
So accepting the tough stuff while still moving towards what matters.
Exactly. Key processes include acceptance of difficult thoughts and feelings without struggle, cognitive diffusion, seeing thoughts as just thoughts, not objective truths, techniques like visualizing thoughts, repeating them, labeling them, being present, mindfulness, connecting with a sense of self as context, the observing self, clarifying values, what's deeply important, and taking committed action, setting goals guided by those values.
And DBT, dialectical behavior therapy.
DBT was originally developed for borderline personality disorder, but is now used for various issues involving intense emotional dysregulation. It emphasizes finding a balance between acceptance and change. That's the dialectical part.
What does it teach?
It typically involves 4 sets of skills. Mindfulness, core skill, being aware of the present moment non-judgmentally. Distress tolerance, learning to cope with painful emotions and crises without making things worse. Techniques like distraction, self-soothing, improving the moment, radical acceptance. Emotion regulation, understanding and changing emotions, reducing vulnerability to negative emotions, increasing positive experiences, and interpersonal effectiveness, navigating relationships assertively, managing conflict, building connections. It often involves both individual and group therapy, and sometimes phone coaching.
What about medication? Where does that fit in?
Medication can be a very effective treatment for some conditions, especially moderate to severe depression and certain anxiety disorders. It's often most effective when used in combination with psychotherapy. For SAD, antidepressants like SSRIs or bupropion might be prescribed, sometimes alongside light therapy. Adherence to medication as prescribed is really important.
Okay, so therapy and potentially medication are key professional helps. What about things people can do on their own? Self-help and coping strategies.
There's a lot people can do. Mindfulness and meditation practices are very powerful. Just learning to pay attention to the present moment, on purpose, without judgment.
How does that help?
It's been shown to reduce stress, anxiety, depression symptoms, and rumination. It improves focus, emotional regulation, and overall well-being. And it doesn't have to be complicated. Simple practices like focusing on your breath, doing a body scan, mindful walking, or eating. Even brief, regular practice can make a difference. Lots of apps and online resources for this now.
What else?
Learning and practicing specific stress management and relaxation techniques. Things like deep breathing exercises, progressive muscle relaxation, yoga or Tai Chi, guided imagery.
Yeah.
Also, finding healthy outlets like massage, spending time in nature, listening to music, engaging in hobbies, using humor. And basic stuff like prioritizing tasks and setting realistic goals can reduce overwhelm.
Journaling. I hear that helps some people.
It can be very beneficial. Writing down thoughts and feelings can be a great emotional release, promote self-understanding, help track moods and triggers, identify patterns, and process difficult experiences.
And general self-care.
Absolutely vital. Making time for oneself, scheduling activities you genuinely enjoy, learning to set boundaries and say no, simplifying obligations where possible, consciously avoiding unhealthy coping mechanisms like excessive alcohol, drugs, or emotional eating. And cultivating practices like gratitude can shift focus,
What about seeking information or support outside of formal therapy?
That's important too. Educating yourself about what you're experiencing from reputable sources can be empowering. Using evidence-based self-help books or workbooks and connecting with others who understand, perhaps through peer support groups, organizations like NAMI or DBSA offer these. Knowing you're not alone is huge.
Okay. Now, lifestyle adjustments. Exercise, diet, sleep. We know they're important for physical health, but for mental health too.
Profoundly important. Physical activity and exercise are incredibly potent tools. Exercise acts as a natural stress reliever, boosts mood through endorphins, reduces symptoms of depression and anxiety, improves sleep quality, enhances cognitive function, and promotes that beneficial neuroplasticity we talked about.
What kind of exercise?
The key is consistency and finding something you enjoy so you stick with it. Aiming for at least 30 minutes of moderate intensity activity most days of the week is a good general guideline. Walking, jogging, swimming, dancing, team sports, whatever works for you.
And nutrition. Does what we eat really affect our mood?
Absolutely. There's growing evidence for the connection between diet and mental health. The gut-brain axis, inflammation, neurotransmitter production. Diets rich in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, lean proteins, and healthy fats, like the Mediterranean diet, are consistently linked to better mental health outcomes.
What should we limit?
It's generally advisable to limit intake of processed foods, sugary drinks, refined carbohydrates, and excessive saturated fats, as these have been associated with poorer mental health. Staying well hydrated is also important. Eating a balanced diet is fundamental self-care.
And sleep. Crucial, right?
Yeah, absolutely crucial. Sleep is essential for emotional regulation, cognitive function, stress management, and overall physical and mental health. Chronic sleep deprivation significantly worsens mood, anxiety, and cognitive problems.
So prioritizing good sleep hygiene.
Yes. Establishing a consistent sleep schedule, creating a relaxing bedtime routine, ensuring your bedroom is dark, quiet, and cool, limiting screen time before bed, these things really make a difference.
And finally, social connection.
It's fundamental. Humans are social creatures. Strong social connections provide emotional support, a sense of belonging, and buffer the negative effects of stress. Social isolation, conversely, is a major risk factor for poor mental health. Nurturing relationships, participating in social activities or groups, volunteering these things actively support well-being.
You have a table summarizing some of these actionable strategies.
Yes, just a quick reference highlighting examples across different categories: stress reduction, physical activity, nutrition, sleep, social connection, mindful practices, cognitive skills, general self-care, along with their benefits and tips, linking back to what we've discussed.
It really sounds like all these strategies, therapy, self-help, lifestyle, they work best together, synergistically.
Exactly. There's a powerful synergy. Exercise improves sleep and mood, making it easier to engage in therapy. Better sleep enhances emotional regulation skills learned in therapy. Mindfulness practices can deepen the effectiveness of CBT techniques. Social support provides a buffer that makes everything else easier to manage. Engaging in multiple positive activities likely creates more robust and lasting changes in the brain through neuroplasticity. It really encourages taking a holistic view and making consistent efforts across multiple domains for sustained well-being.
Okay, this is really helpful, practical stuff. Now, I want to circle back to something that felt really core to the listener's initial feelings, that loss of satisfaction, questioning the reason for living, feeling distant. It sounds like it touches deeply on finding meaning and purpose.
It absolutely does. Those feelings often signal a questioning of life's meaning, value, or purpose. This is a profound human concern, and it often comes to the forefront when we're facing suffering, disillusionment, or major life transitions. Addressing these existential dimensions is often a crucial part of the self-repair journey.
You mentioned Viktor Frankl before and logotherapy.
Yes, Frankl was a psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust concentration camps. His experiences profoundly shaped his view that the primary human drive is not pleasure, as Freud thought, or power, as Adler thought, but the will to meaning.
The drive to find meaning.
Exactly. He believed that even in the most horrific circumstances, life can have meaning, and that finding that meaning is key to psychological survival and well-being. Logotherapy, the school of psychotherapy he founded, aims to help people discover their unique meaning in life.
How did he suggest people find meaning?
He identified three main avenues. First, through creative values, contributing to the world through work, deeds, or creations. Second, through experiential values, finding meaning in what we take from the world through experiences like beauty, nature, culture, or, crucially, through relationships and love.
And the third?
Attitudinal values, This is about the attitude we choose to take towards unavoidable suffering, finding meaning in how we face hardship, demonstrating courage, dignity, or compassion, even when circumstances are terrible. Logotherapy uses techniques like dereflection, redirecting focus away from oneself, and Socratic dialogue to help people connect with these sources of meaning.
And Irvin Yalom's perspective on ultimate concerns, how does that relate?
Yalom, another prominent existential psychotherapist, identified 4 fundamental givens of existence that we all must grapple with: death, our awareness of mortality, freedom, the fact that we are responsible for our choices and lives, existential isolation, the inherent aloneness of our subjective experience even in relationships, and meaninglessness, the lack of inherent preordained meaning in the universe.
That sounds challenging.
It is. Yalom believed that awareness of these ultimate concerns generates anxiety, and we often develop defenses against this anxiety. However, he argued that psychological health involves confronting these concerns authentically, accepting the responsibility that comes with freedom, finding ways to connect despite isolation, and ultimately creating our own meaning in a world that doesn't provide one ready-made. The listener's feelings of distance and questioning life's reason really seem to echo struggles with isolation and meaninglessness.
So suffering is part of life, but meaninglessness makes it unbearable.
That's a good way to put it. Suffering is inevitable. But Frankl would say suffering ceases to be suffering in a way the moment it finds a meaning. A lack of meaning, on the other hand, can lead to despair, emptiness, anxiety, and depression, what Frankl called the existential vacuum.
So if someone feels that lack of meaning, how do they even begin to find it? It sounds so big.
It is big, but it starts with self-reflection. One key approach, central to therapies like ACT, is identifying your core values. Values aren't goals, things you achieve, but deeply held principles about how you want to live, what kind of person you want to be, what truly matters to you.
How do you figure those out?
You can ask yourself questions. What is most important to me deep down? When have I felt most alive and engaged? What qualities do I admire most in others? What do I want to stand for in my life? Sometimes reflecting on what you'd want people to say about you at your funeral can clarify values.
Okay, and once you identify values?
The next step is aligning your actions with those values. Living in alignment means making choices and behaving in ways that are consistent with what you care about, even when it's difficult or uncomfortable. This is what ACT calls committed action. It fosters a sense of authenticity, purpose, and integrity, contrasting sharply with living based on external pressures or fleeting feelings. There's also the Japanese concept of ikigai, finding that sweet spot where what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for intersect.
What about cultivating gratitude? Does that help with meaning?
It absolutely can. Gratitude involves recognizing and appreciating the good things in your life, big or small. Research links regular gratitude practice to increased happiness, optimism, and overall well-being. It helps counteract our natural negativity bias and enhances appreciation for what we do have, which aligns with Frankl's experiential values.
How can you practice gratitude?
Simple ways include keeping a gratitude journal, consciously savoring positive experiences, using mindfulness, expressing thanks directly to others, reflecting on challenges you've overcome, or just taking moments to appreciate simple pleasures.
So this whole search for meaning, it's not just a philosophical exercise, it's actually a really powerful psychological resource.
Absolutely. It acts as an antidote to despair, provides a compass to navigate life's difficulties, and fuels motivation and resilience. Frankl's experiences, Yalom's framework, research on post-traumatic growth, and the integration of values in therapies like ACT all underscore its importance. Actively engaging in this quest by grappling with existential questions, clarifying personal values, and striving to live authentically is a fundamental part of psychological self-repair. It directly addresses those feelings of hopelessness, emptiness, and lack of purpose by offering a pathway towards a life experienced as more valuable and worthwhile.
Okay, the final piece we wanted to touch on is how we view ourselves. The listener asked about self-esteem, but you also brought up self-compassion. How do these fit into building inner resources?
Right. Both self-esteem and self-compassion relate to our self-view and how we treat ourselves, and both can be important inner resources.
Let's start with self-esteem. What is it, and how can we develop healthier self-esteem?
Self-esteem is basically your overall subjective sense of personal worth or value, how much you appreciate and like yourself. Low self-esteem is often linked to conditions like depression, persistent depressive disorder, and anxiety. While healthy self-esteem is generally positive, it can sometimes be fragile, dependent on external achievements or validation.
So how can you work on it? Are there techniques?
Yes, drawing often from CBT principles. Cognitively, it involves becoming aware of and identifying triggers for low self-esteem. Noticing those negative automatic thoughts about yourself. I'm useless. I always fail. Nobody likes me.
Okay.
Then actively challenging those thoughts.
Yeah.
Asking, is this thought based on facts or feelings? What's the evidence against it? Is there another way to look at this situation? Am I using cognitive distortions like overgeneralization or black and white thinking?
And replacing them.
Exactly. Replacing them with more balanced, constructive, and realistic thoughts. Focusing on your positive qualities and past successes. Reframing mistakes as learning opportunities. Offering yourself encouragement rather than harsh criticism.
Are there behavioral things too?
Yes. Engaging in activities that give you a sense of mastery or pleasure. Setting small, achievable goals and acknowledging when you meet them. Practicing basic self-care also sends a message of worth.
What about from an ACT perspective, accepting those thoughts?
ACT techniques can also be very helpful here. Instead of fighting the negative thoughts, you work on changing your relationship to them, using cognitive diffusion. Maybe repeating the thought until it sounds meaningless, visualizing it floating away. Accepting that these uncomfortable thoughts and feelings might show up without letting them dictate your actions.
Forgiveness seems relevant too.
Very much so. Both forgiving yourself for past mistakes, acknowledging wrongs without getting stuck in harsh self-judgment, and forgiving others, which can release bitterness that weighs you down. It might involve self-talk like, I made a mistake, I learned from it, and I can move forward.
Okay, so that's self-esteem. Now, tell us about self-compassion. You suggested it might be even more powerful.
Yes, increasingly, research suggests self-compassion might be a more robust and stable source of inner strength, especially when facing significant suffering or feelings of inadequacy. Dr. Kristen Neff is a leading researcher in this area.
What exactly is self-compassion?
It essentially means extending compassion to yourself in instances of perceived inadequacy, failure, or general suffering. It involves treating yourself with the same kindness, care, understanding, and lack of judgment that you would typically show to a dear friend who is struggling. It's really the antidote to harsh self-criticism.
How is it different from self-pity?
Self-pity tends to involve getting wrapped up in your own problems and feeling like you're the only one suffering. Self-compassion recognizes suffering, but connects it to the shared human experience.
Neff identified 3 core components, right?
Yes, the first is self-kindness versus self-judgment. Being warm and understanding toward ourselves when we suffer, fail, or feel inadequate, rather than ignoring our pain or berating ourselves with criticism.
Okay.
The second is common humanity versus isolation. Recognizing that suffering and personal inadequacy are part of the shared human experience, something that everyone goes through, rather than being something that happens to me alone. It counters that isolating feeling.
That makes sense.
And the third is mindfulness versus over-identification. Taking a balanced approach to our negative emotions, so that feelings are observed with openness and clarity without suppressing them, but also without exaggerating them or getting swept away by them. Holding our pain in mindful awareness.
What are the benefits of cultivating self-compassion? It sounds nice, but does it make a real difference?
The research is really compelling. Self-compassion is consistently linked to greater psychological well-being, increased happiness, optimism, life satisfaction. It's linked to increased motivation, but motivation geared towards learning and growth, mastery goals, rather than just proving yourself. It enhances coping skills and resilience in the face of challenges. It's associated with decreased anxiety, depression, stress, rumination, fear of failure, and perfectionism. Importantly, it provides a more stable sense of self-worth that's less contingent on external validation compared to self-esteem. And no, it's not linked to narcissism or selfishness, quite the opposite.
Any physical benefits?
There's emerging evidence it might have physiological benefits too, like helping to calm the body's threat defense system, the fight or flight response, and activating self-soothing systems associated with oxytocin release. People higher in self-compassion are also more likely to engage in healthy behaviors like sticking to diets, exercising, and seeking medical attention when needed.
That's really powerful. So how can someone practice it? Any specific exercises?
Yes, there are many practical exercises. One is the self-compassion break. Acknowledging the moment of suffering. This is really hard right now. Connecting with common humanity. Suffering is a part of life. Other people feel this way too. And offering yourself kindness. May I be kind to myself in this moment?
Okay.
Another is asking yourself, how would I treat a friend who is going through this exact situation? Then trying to direct that same supportive response toward yourself. Exploring self-compassion through writing, journaling about a difficult experience from a compassionate perspective.
What else?
Using supportive touch, gently placing a hand over your heart or cradling your face, can actually trigger a calming physiological response. Consciously changing your critical self-talk, noticing the harsh inner critic, and intentionally reframing those thoughts in a kinder, more supportive way. Guided meditations focused on self-compassion or loving kindness are also widely available and effective.
So comparing the two, while boosting self-esteem has its place, self-compassion seems to offer something more fundamental, especially when dealing with deep suffering.
I think that's a fair assessment. Self-esteem often relies on feeling good about yourself, succeeding, or feeling better than others. It can crumble when you fail or feel inadequate. Self-compassion, however, is a way of relating to yourself kindly, precisely because you are suffering or feel you failed. It doesn't require you to feel good. It offers comfort because you feel bad.
And that common humanity piece seems key.
It really is. It prevents the isolation that often comes with shame or failure. Self-compassion fosters resilience because it allows you to acknowledge mistakes and learn from them without your fundamental sense of self-worth being threatened. For someone feeling drained, hopeless, or worthless like the listener described, trying to drum up self-approval might feel impossible. But offering oneself kindness because of that pain might feel more accessible. It shifts the focus from trying to earn worthiness to offering unconditional kindness simply because you are a human being who is struggling.
Wow, okay. So, to try and pull all of this together, we've really taken a deep dive into those initial feelings of inner turmoil, that distress.
We have. And hopefully, we've validated that those feelings are real and recognized. We've explored potential underlying conditions like depression, anxiety, burnout, existential concerns, and the many factors that contribute stress, past experiences, society.
But critically, we've also looked at the very real capacity for self-repair. It's not an illusion.
Not at all. Grounded in resilience, post-traumatic growth, and the brain's neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
And we emphasize that this repair is an active process.
Right. Involving evidence-based pathways, therapy options like CBT, ACT, DBT, various self-help strategies, and crucial lifestyle adjustments.
And we highlighted the profound importance of finding meaning and purpose, clarifying values, and living authentically as a powerful psychological resource.
And finally, building those inner resources, developing healthier self-esteem, but perhaps especially cultivating self-compassion for its unique benefits in navigating suffering.
Exactly. Offering ourselves kindness when we need it most.
So the big takeaway seems to be that change, healing, and even growth are possible, even when things feel incredibly dark.
Absolutely. It's a journey, often a difficult one, but you have an inherent capacity to learn, to influence your internal states, and even to physically shape your brain towards greater well-being. Embracing that agency, that potential for active self-repair, is fundamental.
It takes real courage to confront this kind of pain. And it's important to remember, as we've discussed, this journey requires patience, persistence, and perhaps above all, that self-kindness, that self-compassion. By starting to integrate some of these strategies, taking small steps, it really is possible to navigate through the darkness and rediscover a life that feels meaningful, connected, and genuinely worthwhile.
This is DigitView.